Thank you, Sarah, and thank you so much for inviting me today. I have really enjoyed the colloquium so far, and it has really made me feel part of a community because it's the same topics that come up again and again. So I'm going to talk about PISA's response to COVID in the field of education. First, I'm going to give a little overview on PISA. So what is PISA? The Program for International, sorry, I'm having a problem with my screen. What is PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment? This is a program that belongs to the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. That's an international organization that works to build better policies for better lives. And PISA is the world's largest survey of system-level educational outcomes. So here we're talking on the system level, a country level, and economy level, not students, not schools. And we have around 80 participating countries. We have been implementing PISA every 3 years since the year 2000. And in each cycle, we assess more than 500,000 15-year-old students. So this means that we're a sample-based assessment. We select a representative sample at the level of the country, and we focus specifically on 15-year-old students. We also focus on real-life skills, so we're not a curriculum-based assessment. And we have always been a collaborative effort between the participating countries, many experts, and in some cases, external partners. So regarding the content, we always assess reading, science, and maths. And one of them is the main domain, while the others are the minor domains. So every 9 years, one of them becomes the main domain. In addition, we also have innovative domains, as you can imagine by the name. These are tests that are a bit different. They assess different kinds of competencies, such as creative thinking, for example. And we also have some optional assessments that countries may choose to take or not, such as financial literacy and our new foreign language assessment. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. So this is a new assessment that we have for the 2025 cycle. And it's the first international comparison of school systems on student proficiency in foreign languages since the 70s. So we do have the study from the IEA in the 70s. We also have the more recent experience with Surveylang, but that's more of a regional assessment than an actual international assessment. It will be optional, so all participating countries may choose to take it or not. And on the first cycle, we will focus on assessing reading, listening, and speaking, specifically speaking production. And we will focus on assessing English only. And we will also have some contextual questionnaires. And our idea is that in future cycles, we may assess other skills and other languages. And this is also a collaborative effort between several actors. We have been working with many external partners, many experts with the participating countries. And we would like to highlight that the European Commission has been essential in this work. They have assisted us with their expertise. And they have also provided co-funding that has been essential for the development of the assessment. So what do countries get out of PISA? And I'm sure you're quite familiar with some of the things. Perhaps we're best known for the benchmarking. Everybody knows the ranking in PISA. But we provide a lot more than just the ranking. We also provide a description of students' proficiency. So we provide each country with a percentage of students in each proficiency level for every domain that we assess. We also provide trends. This means that countries participate more than once in PISA and they can see if their students have improved or not. So they can actually see if the policies seem to be working. And all this has to do with the cognitive components, with the tests. But we also go beyond just this. We also have results on non-cognitive outcomes, for example, student attitudes. And we also provide contextualized results. Because what we aim at is being able to explain the results, because that's what gives us policy lessons. And that's what allows us to identify best practices. And we do this thanks to the background questionnaires. So in addition to the tests, we have a battery of different questionnaires. So we have a lot of contextual information. So one of the questionnaires is a student questionnaire that collects a lot of information about the students, about their attitudes, their dispositions, what they do at home, how many hours a week do they do homework, do they have dinner with their parents, many questions about their school and their learning experiences. We also have a school questionnaire that's responded by the school principal about school management and organization, the learning environment, We also have a system level questionnaire that focuses on things that happen at the system level, such as allocation of resources. And we have optional questionnaires, such as the parent questionnaire and the teacher questionnaire. And thanks to all this, the tests and the questionnaires, PISA has been able to produce, or I don't know if produce, but to have an impact on the systems that are participating, to have an impact on the policies of countries. And we have seen three kinds of impacts. So the first one has to do with triggering structural reforms. So for example, we have seen that in Germany, PISA triggered a very large-scale public debate on education and policy changes that led to improvements in quality and equity. PISA also guides curriculum reform and strengthens national assessment and monitoring systems. So for example, Brazil developed a competence-based curriculum and assessment system that was linked to PISA. And lastly, PISA facilitates peer learning across countries. And here we see two types of peer learning. So on one hand, countries tend to look at what high performers are doing. And on the other hand, they tend to look at their peers, at countries that are more similar to them and that seem to be doing something well, to see if perhaps they could emulate those practices. So that was the background of what PISA is, what PISA does. And very briefly, this is our response to COVID. So it's also very important for us to highlight that everything in PISA requires long-term planning. We have to do everything years in advance. So when COVID began last year, we were in the middle of PISA 2021, because though it was PISA 2020, we were actually in the middle of the field trial. That's an essential part of PISA. And because the school was closed, we had a huge problem because we didn't have any schools that we could assess. And there was a discussion among the PISA governing board. And finally, it was decided to move PISA 2021 for one whole year. So it became PISA 2022. And this means that all the subsequent cycles also moved. So PISA 2024 became PISA 2025, and so on. And at the same time, we were already working on PISA 2024. We actually had this design completely ready. We were working on terms of reference. So we were working on parallel on two different PISA cycles. So that's one impact that actually COVID had on us more than us having a reaction to it. Then we will have a measurement of educational outcomes that will be collected in 2022 and reported in late 2023. And this is the regular PISA data collection. But the difference is that the cohort that we will be assessing will be the cohort that suffered COVID. So we think that it's essential that we can provide an assessment, because once you have the data from the assessment, you can start planning what to do and you can react based on data. In addition, we added a global crisis module to the questionnaires for the PISA 2022 cycle. And I'm going to describe this in more detail. And we also made some modifications to the questionnaires of the foreign language assessment that we were working on, PISA 2025. And I will also tell you a little bit more about that. And all these modifications were based on previous work that we had already done that could help us understand how well prepared teachers and students could be for COVID. So the global crisis module for PISA, the context was that we had 1.5 billion students who were impacted by school closures. This is all around April, May last year. This is the timeline in which this thinking happened. We realized that remote learning had become the lifeline for learning, but as has been mentioned here, we know, for example, that it doesn't address the social functions of schools. Many researchers saw this as an opportunity. Remote learning could perhaps help bridge gaps between urban and rural schools in terms of their access to learning. Perhaps we would have learning gains from the use of digital technologies. But, and this is a major but, that's why it has the capital letters, we were well aware of the inequality of access to everything that you need for long-distance learning to work. So online resources, capacities for resilience, and several other things. And because PISA is an international assessment, we knew that countries were in really different places to be able to approach this. So we needed more evidence to be able to understand the PISA 2022 results. But we already had a little bit of evidence because in PISA 2018, we had collected a lot of information about student and school preparedness for remote learning. So here we were not thinking of COVID, we just happened to collect this data. So we had a lot of information of how unequal this was in terms of access to computers at home, access to internet at home, teacher training and preparation for online teaching, other things that were mentioned in the morning, such as, do you have a quiet space to study at home? So here on the slide, I just have some of the data that we had. So we knew that in countries such as Denmark or Switzerland, over 95% of the students reported that they had a computer to use for working at home. But on the other hand, we have countries like Malaysia or the Philippines or Indonesia, where over 40% of students reported not having a computer to use for working at home. So we have these huge differences between countries. And we also have another situation. So in Mexico, for example, we see that 94% of 15-year-olds from privileged backgrounds have internet in their homes, compared to only 29% of those from disadvantaged backgrounds. So it's not just between countries that we have these differences. In many cases, it's also within countries. Sorry. So some more data that we had at the time, this was in May 2020, was that in our directorate, we had done a questionnaire countries, and we had asked them what strategies will be used for school reopening. Again, this is what people had in mind in May 2020 last year. It was not a certainty, it was what people thought was going to happen. And we could see that actually returning to normal scheduling with student attendance was not what most countries had in mind. They were thinking of different kinds of strategies, such as a progressive return of students, for example, by age cohorts, perhaps to keep classroom-based teaching, but then you would be doing this in shifts. Not everybody would be able to go together. Many mentioned hybrid models. So we knew that it was very unlikely that we would be going back to normal in the short term, and we needed information. So the goals of this module is this. We needed data on how education systems responded to the pandemic, how students' learning experiences and well-being were impacted, how schools and students feel about their preparedness for potential future school closures. So we added 10 new questions and modified one question in the student questionnaire. And we added 12 new questions and modified 2 questions in the school questionnaire. And here you can see the content of this module. So in the first row, you can see the policy areas that we have, such as student beliefs, attitudes, feelings, and behaviors. And beneath that, you can see the constructs that we added. So in this case, there were feelings about learning at home, feeling of preparedness for future school closures, self-directed learning, self-efficacy, subjective impression of learning during school closure. And you can see with the same logic, we also added constructs to teaching practices and learning opportunities, to school practices, policies, and infrastructure. And we added one to governance system level policies and practices. And now I would like to share with you a couple of examples. So this is a question from the student questionnaire, a new question. It aims at assessing self-directed learning self-efficacy. And the question is, how confident do you feel about doing the following things if your school building closes again in the future? And then for each of these options, they had to say how confident they are. And we have items such as using a learning management system or school learning platform, using a video communication program, finding learning resources online on my own, planning when to do schoolwork on my own, motivating myself to do schoolwork, etc. And this is another example from the school questionnaire. This relates to school closure preparation and teacher resources. And the question is, during the time when your school building was closed to students because of COVID-19, were the following resources used to support teachers in providing remote instruction? And the items are regular meetings with other teachers and staff, online platforms and tools for self-directed or collaborative learning, tools that help teachers develop remote instruction plans, etc. So these questions were included in the field trial. The field trial is happening this year instead of last year. And the questions that make it through the field trial to the main survey will be applied in the main survey for PISA 2022. And now I would like to tell you about the adaptations that we made to the PISA foreign language assessment. So the timeline for this is completely different because PISA 22 was happening. We were collecting the data already. But in the case of PISA 2025, we were actually designing the instruments when COVID began. And the other thing that we were doing that I would like to share with you is we were writing a paper based on TALIS data, where we wanted to see if there was anything that made foreign language teachers different to other teachers. And what we found was that actually there was, and we summarize this by saying that foreign language teachers are ambassadors of multilingualism and international exchange. So we have two main ideas in this paper. One is that foreign language teachers are more likely to have been trained in multilingual and multicultural teaching, and also that they feel better prepared to teach in multilingual and multicultural classrooms. So that was one aspect. And the other was that traveling abroad seemed to be not really important, but more of a fundamental part of foreign language teachers' training, of their professional development, and of the role that they play in schools. So the percentages I have here are specifically for EU teachers, but the same difference between foreign language teachers and the rest of the teachers can be seen when you use the average for all TALIS participants. So we see here that 52% of the foreign language teachers have studied abroad during the teaching education compared to only 18% of other teachers. Also that 26% of foreign language teachers have taught abroad compared to just 9% for other teachers. And that 43% of foreign language teachers have been abroad to accompany visiting students versus 16% of other teachers. And we were looking at these data when COVID happened. So we were quite concerned. We were thinking, well, how are teachers going to manage if traveling abroad seems to be such a big part of the training and of the work that they do? And we thought that perhaps they would be able to manage because of their ICT abilities, because we saw that foreign language teachers were actually more likely than other teachers to use ICT in the classroom pre-COVID. So we thought, okay, maybe they're better prepared. And they, as well as teachers on average, report that they participate in professional development networks. So we also thought, okay, maybe this is something that can help them during this period. So in parallel to doing this TALIS paper, we were also working on preparing the questionnaires for the foreign language assessment for PISA 2025, because we thought it was actually going to happen in 2024. And in PISA, we have to prepare the instrument very much in advance. So while we were doing this, we were in the middle of doing this, COVID happened, and there was a lot of uncertainty about how long was this going to last. So we thought, okay, even if it doesn't last too much, perhaps countries still won't return to the same teaching practices, because if you found that something worked, maybe you will continue using it. And we also thought, well, worst case scenario, this goes on for a long time, though I don't think anybody really thought this would go on until 2025 at that point. But we still thought, okay, the experience that this cohort of teachers and students will have will be different to the experience that previous cohorts had, and we still need information about it. So we should include it in the questionnaires anyway. And we were thinking mostly of this increased role of ICT to replace physical presence and also to replace physical mobility. So we did an additional review of the questionnaire items to try to reflect these changes in the teaching and learning environment. And we invited our experts and the participating countries to suggest new items. And after all the review process, we have 31 new answer options that were added to the existing 19 questions across all 5 questionnaires. And the kind of additions that we expected to measure had to do with the variation in ICT use for remote teaching and learning, but also for everything that has to do with language and cultural exchange. We were looking at student and parent self-efficacy. And in the case of the school and system level questionnaires, we also looked at infrastructure and capacity for remote teaching and learning. And I would also like to share some examples of questions with you. So here, the question already existed. What we added is what is highlighted in yellow. So this is a question from the school questionnaire. It refers to ICT skills and language intercultural exchange. And the question is, do the following statements reflect practices for multicultural and multilingual learning in your school? So you can see that there were many items already, but they were all based on physical presence. So now we added this one that says, in our school, students are encouraged to communicate remotely with people speaking other languages. This is another example from the teacher questionnaire. This refers to teacher capacity for remote teaching. And the question is, to what extent were any of the topics listed below included in your professional development activities during the last 12 months? Here, most of the things were not digital, so we added digital elements, such as using digital tools for English teaching, teaching English remotely, assessing English skills remotely. And this last example is from the student questionnaire. This refers to foreign language learning outside of school. And the question is, how often do you do the following activities outside school? And here, if you see the items, you will see that we already had several things that had to do with online activities, because this was something that students were already doing pre-COVID. So, for example, play video games in English that may be online, visit websites written in English. We already had that kind of thing, but we added a few. We added specifically to use language learning apps and to use English mobile apps whose main purpose is not language learning. So this is the final slide in my presentation. In the case of this questionnaire, we still have some time. So we do have the opportunity to perhaps review this early next year to see if the changes that we made still hold. But I think that they do, based on the review that we already did. So thank you very much.